Aren't you proud to be a Thunder Bayer today? We made it. I got some friends in Vancouver posting on their Facebook, hey, we got an inch of snow. We got to shut the city down. It's true, I lived there, I saw it. Well, listen, I'm Mark Davenport, one of the pastors here at Redwood Park Church. Really glad that you are with us today. We are in the second week of a series called Keep Moving Forward. And we talked last week about the fact that although we are in this season of transition at Redwood, we're not sitting down, we're not stopped. We're going on, we're keeping moving, and we're on an active path to discovering what God has for us at this specific time and what He wants to release in us in this season of transition for us as a church. You know, we talked a bit last week about significant changes. And I asked you the question, what was the most significant change that you've ever experienced in your life? And significant change, the kind of change that causes you to undergo a dramatic shift in your life. Man, it's scary. Like whether you've chosen that or not, it's scary. And we might be eager, to take a new job somewhere, but relocating is filled with questions, with unknowns. There's this whole subject of relationships. If you've not been in one for a while, you've never been in one and have the opportunity, that getting back into that is scary. Or what about being asked to do something that you've never done before and you're being asked to do it in front of other people? Man, for some of you, that's like the scariest thing ever. And with all these things in mind, your decision and your willingness to step into an area that has unknowns and risks and possibilities of failure requires courage for you to step into that, and that's what we're talking about today. So with that in mind, another question for you today is, what is the most courageous thing that you've ever done? And in order for us to understand that, I'm going to give you my thoughts or understanding what I believe courage is. Courage is the choice and willingness to confront agony, pain, danger, uncertainty, or intimidation. So with that understanding of courage, when in your life have you been willing to choose to confront pain or uncertainty, or chosen to go the risky path, or made a decision that may not have made sense, but you knew deep down inside you had to do it. Maybe other people thought you shouldn't, but you said, no, I need to make that decision. I need to do it. So in my life, I made this crazy decision in 2013 on a trip to New Zealand to go tandem skydiving. Now, why did I do that? I mean, it's hard for me to explain, except that I felt that I had to do this. And Karen and I made this commitment before the trip that we were going to do things that we hadn't done before and experience things that we might not have been able to experience in other places. And so although I believe this was a courageous decision, depending on who you are, you might just think that it was a stupid decision. When I made the suggestion to Karen that we do this, she definitely thought it was a stupid decision. And her initial response was, no way, I'm not doing that, forget it. But, I was like, come on, you've got to do it. I gave her all this reasoning and thoughts, and believe it or not, she was like, okay, I'm going to go for it. She decided she was going to do it. And, of course, my kids, Alex and Jake, that were with us, they were all over it. They absolutely wanted to do it. They couldn't wait. Now, let me tell you, I had second thoughts once we got up in the plane, and I found out I was going to be the first one to jump out. And I had asked one of the professionals on the ground before we left, I said, hey, has anyone ever died from doing this? And he said, yes. And I said, wow, okay, that filled me with confidence. I did survive it, to let you know. Just in case you didn't realize it, I survived it, I finished it. But I can tell you this, something in my life changed after that. And I realized that I had overcome a fear, not just a fear of heights, but a disposition of fear that had been with me for a good chunk of my life. And the decision to skydive had broken something off of my life and provided this indelible memory for our family to experience and have for the rest of our lives. Now, was it courageous? I guess depending on who you are and what you think about things like that, your point of view, you might think that was courageous, maybe not. But my idea of courage and what your idea of courage is might be different. But sometimes, I think we associate courage with this idea of like going to war. We honor our troops and our veterans on Remembrance Day because we don't just value their willingness to serve, we honor their willingness to exert courage in their lives. And in fact, we think that courage is such an important value that we created that holiday, Remembrance Day, to honor those who express that value in that way. But here we are today, we're at this time of history where we're experiencing a time of peace. Now, yes, there are conflicts all over the world. There's always going to be conflicts, except that I don't think anyone would really say right now that we're living in wartime, except that for some of us, we are at war. And maybe some of us are at war in our homes with our partners or with our kids. Or maybe we're at war in our workplaces with our bosses or our jobs. In fact, some of us were at war with ourselves. We're encountering inner demons, our addictions, our attitudes, our temptations. And where is our courage to stand up to these things in our lives and confront the pain and the uncertainty that we're experiencing in these places of internal war? Former U.S. President John F. Kennedy, he said this in his book, Profiles of Courage. He said, "The courage of life is often a less dramatic spectacle than the courage of a final moment, but it is no less a magnificent mixture of triumph and tragedy. A man does what he must in spite of personal consequences, in spite of obstacles, dangers, and pressures. To be courageous requires no exceptional qualifications, no magic formula, no special combination of time, place, and circumstance. It's an opportunity that sooner or later is presented to us all. In whatever arena of life one may meet the challenge of courage, whatever may be the sacrifices he faces if he follows his conscience, the loss of friends, his fortune, his contentment, even the esteem of his fellow men, each man must decide for himself the course he will follow." And we see these words that President Kennedy wrote still holding truth for us today as we consider how to keep moving forward. And in this quote, he talks about the courage of life. And this stands out to me because I'm not sure we think of everyday life as an opportunity to express courage. My thoughts about courage are usually in the realm of some act of bravery, like a soldier charging up the hill amongst enemy fire, or someone jumping off a boat in the middle of a storm to save someone who's gone overboard. But the reality is that sometimes it takes just as much courage to get up in the morning, to not just pull the covers over our head and just go, forget it. Courage can be expressed in the simple tasks of caring for those not easy to care for. Some of you are here today expressing courage because you decided to come to church. And I know some of your stories out there. I know some of you have been hurt by the church before, and you haven't had very good experiences. And so showing up today is you overcoming an obstacle in the hopes that something good is going to happen. And that's courage. Bottom line, friends, is that if we are going to keep moving forward, there are a couple of realities we need to understand and be willing to embrace. And the first of those realities revolves around our willingness to express courage. And what I'm saying is that the trait of courage, it's not just a good character quality. We must be willing to express the courage released in us by the power of the Holy Spirit if we want to receive more of what God has for us. But in order for us to express this courage, we've got to know we have it in the first place. And some of you out there today might be thinking to yourselves, I'm actually not that courageous. And you've got a lot of fears. Or you've been down this road before, and the last time you stepped out on a limb to express some courage, you fell flat on your face, and so you've got no plans to go there again. You might say that when you jumped out of the plane, the parachute didn't open, but worse, you survived the fall. And now you're really messed up. You might be saying, hey, Mark, thanks for the invitation to be courageous, but you know what? I'm just doing fine right here where I'm at right now. But here's the thing. I can tell you that you have courage. I can pep you up, try to motivate you, get all loud with my preaching, try to make you believe that you have it. But unless you believe it's in you, all my efforts to convince you is not going to do much good. And sometimes it takes a word from God that He speaks to you for you to know what you've got inside you. And that's exactly what happens to a guy named Gideon that we find in the Old Testament. And the story of Gideon is found in the Old Testament book of Judges, chapter 6. Now I'm going to give you a little backdrop here about Gideon. And this begins with the Israelites being ravaged by the Midianites as a consequence of their disobedience to God. For 7 years, they faced invasions from all these eastern foreigners who ruined their crops and destroyed their cattle. And although they had been unfaithful by worshiping foreign gods, they cried out to God without even realizing why all this bad stuff was happening to them. And so God sends them a prophet to remind them of how the one true God had provided for them in the past, and yet how quickly they had forsaken Him. And so we can pick up the story starting in verse 11 of Judges chapter 6. It says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Now, friends, this is where it starts. This is where it started with Gideon, and this is where it's going to begin with us. And that is, it's our willingness to hear who the Lord says that we are. Gideon, he's just out in the fields. He's minding his own business. He's doing his job. He's not kneeling at the altar seeking God. He's not deep in prayer, crying out to God. It's the Lord that comes to him at His initiative through these angels. And the Lord says two things right here to Gideon. He says, I am with you. And then He tells Gideon who he is. He declares him to be a mighty warrior. And in this moment, Gideon hears who he really is. And believe me, Gideon needed to hear who he really was, because we can see from a couple of verses down where when God tells Gideon about who he is, Gideon tells God who he thinks he is. So it says in verse 15, but Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. That's who Gideon thinks he is. Now, anyone else out there feel like they're weak, or that you're the least in your entire family? Or my faith is weak. If you're really examining your heart, examining yourself, do you feel like, you know what, I'm just not that strong. I'm not that strong in my faith. I'm not reading my Bible as much as I want to. I'm not praying as much as I want to. I'm not doing the things that people supposedly who know what they're doing are saying I should do. I'm not really doing that. My life is okay, but it's not that hot. We're feeling weak, or you're feeling weak in other areas of your life. You're feeling weak in 100 different ways. And when we feel these things about ourselves, we need God to come in and tell us who we really are. We need to hear what our true identity is and who God thinks that we are, who we are meant to be. And God reveals to Gideon who his true identity is. You see, to truly know who we are, We must discover ourselves in light of what God says, because it's through God that our true identity is revealed. And if we don't know who we really are, if we don't understand who God has made us to be, how can we ever step into the courageous places that God is asking us to go? But moving forward and walking in courage requires something else. And the other important part of the Gideon story happens in verses 13 and 14. Look at what he says. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied. "But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." And the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength that you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" So here we see the second thing that we need in order to walk in courage. God reveals to Gideon that it's He, God, who is sending him, and God encourages Gideon by affirming his strength. But then He provides the purpose that's necessary for Gideon to go from there and to be courageous. Well, what's that purpose? To save Israel, to save God's people. So what's our purpose, Redwood? What is our purpose? It's so important that we understand what our purpose is. Otherwise, we have no reason for us to express courage. Our purpose here as a body called Redwood Park Church is also our mission. Do you know what the mission of Redwood Park Church is? Does anybody actually know the mission? That's not a board member. Okay, I'm going to tell you what the mission is. It's actually in our mission statement that we have. It's written up in some governance documents that we've got. Here is the mission, should we choose to accept it. It's to impact our city and beyond with the message and life of Jesus. I'll say it again. Our mission as Redwood Park Church is to impact our city and beyond with the message and life of Jesus. We want to love God. We want to love one another, and we want to live beyond ourselves. That's in those documents. And those may sound like simple words, but they are the foundation for who we are as a church. How do we accomplish that mission without being courageous? We need to know who we are, and we need to understand our purpose in order to walk in courage. And this is absolutely critical if we want to keep moving forward. And friends, when you know who you are, you know why you are. Identity and purpose. Who are you today? Do you know who you are? Do you know why you're here? And not just here in this church service. I'm not saying, well, Mark, I'm here because I came to church. I wanted to hear the singing and a message and put my kids in kids. But no, I'm not talking about why you're here at church. I'm asking you why you're here on the planet. You know, I believe that some of us here today, we're still trying to figure out these questions. And you know what? These are great questions. And I believe that if I was going to be having a personal one-on-one conversation with some of you today, and I said, "Who are you?" You might be able to pull out your wallet and show me some ID, okay? But would you be able to answer that question? And if not, that's okay. I mean, there's churches all across Thunder Bay filled with people like you and me looking for the answer to that question. And that's why I believe that part of what God is doing with us right now at Redwood is shaping our identity as a church. Who are we? What do we want to be? Who are we called to be? And why are we here? Are the defining questions we need to answer in this super critical time for us as a church. You know, another one of the realities that we need to embrace is that we are going to face resistance and that we need to overcome obstacles. And each obstacle we face presents another opportunity for us to make a decision. Are we going to go forward or are we going to go backwards? And what course will we follow? And we will be faced with some of the same challenges that the disciples faced as their courage got put to the test. We were looking last week at the book of Acts in the New Testament to see what the apostles did once Jesus left. And we see all these amazing things that they were doing, but we also see the cost and the apostles and the obstacles that they encountered while doing them. So I want to look at Acts 5. It says this, starting in verse 12 of Acts chapter 5. The apostles were performing many miraculous signs and wonders among the people, and all the believers were meeting regularly at the temple in the area known as Solomon's Colonnade. But no one else dared to join them, even though all the people had high regard for them. Yet more and more people believed and were brought to the Lord, crowds of both men and women. As a result of the apostles' work, sick people were brought out into the streets on beds and mats, so that Peter's shadow might fall across some of them as he went by. Crowds came from the villages around Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those possessed by evil spirits, and they were all healed. And the high priest and his officials, who were Sadducees, were filled with jealousy. And they arrested the apostles and put them in public jail. Now I read this story and I wonder, how could there be opposition to what the apostles were doing? I mean, sick people were getting healed, and the power of God is on display, and miracles are taking place before their eyes, and even Peter's shadow is healing people. But then look at the obstacle that they encounter. The jealousy of the Sadducees, the religious leaders. And I don't know if you're new to faith or not, you're sitting out there and you're wondering who these Sadducee guys are, and you're probably thinking, what is their problem? Well, I want to just explain a little bit about who the Sadducees were to give us a better understanding of that. And what we know about these Sadducee guys is that they believed in unrestrained free will, meaning God had no role in the personal lives of humans. Everyone was master of his or her own destiny. Sadducees rejected entirely the supernatural. They didn't believe in angels, demons, heaven, hell, resurrection, none of that. And in their way of thinking, souls die with the body. And so when you die, that's it. It's over, the end. And given what the apostles are doing, you can see why they were having a problem. They also believed strongly in ritual purity as prescribed by Moses. They didn't want anything to disqualify them from leading the temple services because that's how they earned their money. In other words, accumulating wealth was their number one priority. But above all, they hated Jesus and they hated his teachings. And you may say, well, why did they hate Jesus? Because Jesus threatened their erroneous belief systems. And if Jesus' teaching was right, the most of what they lived and taught was wrong. And sometimes the obstacles we face in our attempts to express courage are obstacles that are inside us, including jealousy. You know, I want to believe that good things are going to happen in my life, but I want to control how they happen and when they happen. I want to be in control. What about if good things are happening around me or happening to other people? Am I okay with that? How many times have you been in situations where you prayed and begged and wished for something, a healing, or no matter what it was, and nothing, there was no answer to your prayer. You just kept praying and praying and nothing was happening. And then you find out about a friend of yours who's got the exact same problem. It just started. They prayed one prayer. Boom, they got healed. Boom, their financial thing got solved. And you're like, what about me? What's wrong with me, God? Why'd you do this to Mary or to Fred, but not me? You know, it's easy to feel jealous of other people's successes. And if we're going to keep moving forward, then we have to align ourselves with what God is doing, which may very well mean we are out of our comfort zones or time frames. And a super close examination of our hearts may reveal that we've all got a little bit of Sadducee going on in here. How about this? Have you ever found yourself trying to do the right thing to express courage, and at every point in trying to do the right thing, it seems like you get blocked? Have you ever done the right thing and then gotten in trouble for doing the right thing? I love that one. Or you did what you thought was the kind and compassionate and loving thing, and that decision ended up causing you heartbreak and chaos and pain to the point where you wish you had never even done it in the first place. You know, I talked to someone that I'm close with very recently who was describing for me an agonizing predicament that he and his wife are in. And this couple embarked on a mission of compassion. They wanted to put into practice their values for caring for the poor and the needy. And they were tired of just giving lip service to this value. And they decided to put this value into practice by becoming foster parents. And so they jumped through all the hoops that the state needed them to jump through, and that resulted in them becoming foster parents to two young African-American kids who were in the foster system and had been rescued from a terrible home situation. And so they brought these children into their home. They treated them as their own kids. They loved them. They cared for them. They did everything they could to give them a better life that they believed that God had for them. They had believed that this had been their calling, to live out their values that they're teaching to their other 5 children that live in the house. And they've had intentions all along of adopting these kids, changing their last names, bringing them fully into the family legally. But now they're faced with the older boy having severe behavioral issues. And these issues are creating family chaos, destroying the family dynamic. Even their marriage is undergoing trauma. And they've tried everything they know how to get the boy help, counselors, medication, therapy, strategy after strategy, with no discernible difference having been made in the little boy's life. And they've gone deep into the adoption process, although it's not been finalized yet. And they're asking themselves now if they can really go through with it. Can they bring these 2 children permanently into their home and go through an undetermined amount of pain, family dysfunction, and even more marriage trauma? Would they be in some way sacrificing their other children and even their marriage if they continue to go forward in this process? They're faced with 2 horrible choices. Take the kids, complete the adoption process, embrace the pain that they're sure to experience that may even increase in its scope, or give the kids back to the foster system, forcing the children to undergo yet another painful transition, a decision that they are sure is going to have brutal consequences for these kids being thrown back into a system that has no answers for them at all. They've come to love these children, but they are at their breaking point. They simply can't see a path forward. What do they do? And this is the kind of story that symbolizes that when we exercise courage, believing that it's the right thing to do, we sometimes encounter severe and brutal obstacles that are present in their story. Are we willing to still exercise courage in the face of what we're sure is going to be a tough road ahead? Hearing God's voice and knowing what He is saying becomes critical to our decision-making process when we find ourselves in these kinds of seemingly difficult, no-win type of situations. You know, as we seek to keep moving forward, sometimes decisions are made to change directions. We need to be able to embrace change. We need to embrace flexibility, not allow ourselves to be too connected to the old way of doing things. Remember, we talked last week about wanting to embrace the new thing, right? But whatever changes get made, whatever new thing begins to take shape, whatever risks there are involved in pursuing new direction, can cause us to face choices that are going to be difficult. And it's part of how we exercise our courage. So just how do you exercise that type of courage? What are you supposed to do? What are your next steps? Well, I have some thoughts for you. Number one, set your compass on courage. And by that I mean spend some time figuring out what you want and where do you want to end up. Do you want a closer relationship with Jesus this year? Would you like to develop some deeper relationships in your life? Are you interested in hearing God's voice more in your life? And if any of these things sound good to you, you can start a Bible reading program through YouVersion, which is a Bible application you can download on your smartphone. There's tons of amazing books out there. We talked about these two last year. One was Hearing the Voice of God. Another one called God Has a Name by John Mark Comer. Either of these books are available. And there's tons of other resources out there. And if you need some help getting pointed in the right direction, you can talk to your small group leader or one of the staff. Number two, face your fears. Commit to doing some things this year that you haven't done before. And whatever those things may be, are they really as scary as you think they are? If you're willing to do that, find someone you can trust. Hold yourself accountable to them in it, or find a partner who's willing to do them with you. Number three, embrace uncertainty. You know, it's okay that you don't know everything. No one does. Be willing to commit to something even if you don't know beforehand how it's all going to work out. Maybe for you that could be joining a small group or meeting some new people, or risk praying for something that you're not sure has a chance of happening, but staying in a posture of waiting to see what God might do. And finally, number four, allow yourself to be vulnerable. And this may be the most courageous thing that you could do. We're probably all scared about what would happen if people really knew who we really were, right? I mean, we're all pretty good at putting on our Sunday faces here, but you know, if they find out who I really was, I'd probably get kicked out of here. You know, and that whole value is called nobody's perfect. It's a value we embrace here at Redwood Church. You know, do you want to stay stuck in that place that you're stuck in, whatever it is? If not, be willing to step out into courage and with faith and allow one or two people into that private place, trusting that God knows you and that He's got your back. How do we keep moving forward? By understanding who we are, by embracing our true identity. Be willing to hear from God about who He says that you are, and be willing to step into those places of courage that He's asking you to. That's your purpose, right there. And for some of us, maybe that is just getting out of bed every day. And if that's where you're at, okay, then get out of bed. For some of us, maybe it's a different kind of courage. Might not be jumping out of a plane, but it may be taking a chance. You can risk putting yourself out there and seeing what God's going to do. And maybe for some of you, it's going to be allowing Jesus to come into your life in ways that you haven't let Him before. Maybe that's courage to start giving financially, or maybe that's courage to start reading your Bible. And maybe there's courage there to begin to pray and become vulnerable and trust God for all the dreams in your life that you haven't been able to express or have been afraid to express up till now. But allowing yourself to be transformed by who He is in you may be the most courageous thing that you could ever do. And if you do it, I want to assure you, He's not going to let you down. That's His promise to you. It's His promise to us as a church. So I'm going to invite you to stand, and I'm going to pray for us. Would you do that for me? Lord, I'm asking you to come and work in us and help us move to the point that we just want to say yes to you. Because for some of us, Lord, that's all we can do. And even getting to that point, Lord, was going to require some courage. Because once we say yes, we're opening ourselves up to being approached by you whenever and wherever, and have you speak a word into our life, just like Gideon had spoken to him by your angels that came to him while he was in the field. So, Lord, I'm asking for that today. Come, be with us, God, as we seek you and seek to express courage today, to be the people whom you have called us to be. In your name.